On a bright day before the Jewish Passover, Jesus invaded Jerusalem. Now, everybody knew the script. Step 1, rally supporters. Step 2, enter Jerusalem riding like a king. Step 3, shed the blood, bathe the city in the blood of the hated occupiers. Now, they knew the script because they had seen it before. Several hundred years before, it was the Maccabees who had ridden into Jerusalem, also hailed by palm branches, who had overthrown the hated Greek overlords and drove them out of the city. God's people had been accompanied by wrath and vengeance. And so here's Jesus, showing up at the edge of Jerusalem, accompanied by his disciples. He is seated on a donkey, and it seems like everything is going to fall into place. That hope was still out there, and we know that even 40 years after Jesus, someone came along by the name of Menachem, son of a certain Judas the Galilean, and he would enter into Jerusalem with his armed followers, acting like a king, appearing in the temple dressed in royal robes. And hadn't Jesus just told a story to his disciples about a ruler who came and who killed those who opposed his rule? I mean, isn't this what they were expecting? Ride on, ruler of vengeance, gallop in on the war horse of the conquering king, unleash sword, spear, flame, maybe an elephant or two. But no, Jesus came in peace. Jesus comes in peace. And it's hard to say who is most surprised by this, his disciples or those who met him at the entrance to the city of Jerusalem. You know, his closest disciples had been hearing him for several years. They kind of knew how he taught, and they knew how he thought. Verse 37, we see that he is surrounded by those disciples who are singing, and they're praising God for all of the miracles that they had seen. So they knew that Jesus' ministry was about healing, was about restoring what had been broken and lost, binding up the wounded. They'd seen people set free from the powers of darkness. But perhaps here, they thought they would see the flip side of mercy. They would see the wrath of God, judgment. And we know that even later on, the disciples still had their doubts and were still not sure about some things. In the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 6, after the resurrection, they said, "Lord, is this the time? Is this the time, finally? Is this the time when you will restore the kingdom of Israel?" But Jesus' invasion is not that kind of invasion. He is not that kind of king. His kingdom is not of this world, or his followers would be fighting for him, as he says at another point. Jesus was acting out his mercy and love for the people of Jerusalem, for all people, by this ride. Jesus comes in peace. And you know, today on Palm Sunday, we typically call this the triumphal entry. But it's really the peaceful entry. We see Jesus laying down his ride into Jerusalem on prophetic clockwork. He told his disciples in advance, look at verse 30, he says what they're going to find. Go ahead to the village and then enter it, and you'll find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it, bring it to me. If anyone asks you why you're untying that colt, say, the Lord needs it. He rode on a donkey. It's not the war horse of a conqueror. We all know that. But more importantly, the donkey fulfills the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he. Humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Here comes your king. And the people get it. They named him king. They're singing the words of Psalm 118, verse 38. They say, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." They say, they proclaim God's peace in heaven and glory in the highest. The Pharisees got it too, right? Because they know this is going to cause a lot of trouble. And they say, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." but it is not possible for them to squelch their praise. Verse 40, I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. The conquering king rides into Jerusalem. His cheering throngs are behind him. He prepares the way of the Lord. And then, verse 41, which we didn't read today, but verse 41, as he approached Jerusalem, look at this, as he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it. He wept. I mean, really? This is the conquering king. He comes into the city of Jerusalem and he weeps. And there's verse 45, we see him entering the temple and driving out those who are selling. He says, it is written, my house will be a house of prayer. You've turned it into a den of robbers, but no one is killed, no one is maimed, and worse yet, no Romans are driven out. God's judgment falls upon God's own people in God's own temple. What does this mean? It means that we need to think about Jesus' ministry again. We've got to pay attention to the way that he works. We need to keep in mind that he is always living and acting as an example to his disciples, including as an example to us. So Jesus does things intentionally. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, it's his ministry in miniature. It's God with us, God among us, God entering into life with us, not to destroy us, not to break us down, but seeking our salvation, our life, seeking that we might truly and abundantly live. What Jesus does in his triumphal entry is what he does in all of our lives. It's what he had been doing in his ministry up to that point. Jesus comes in peace. We've seen this before. Jesus goes to the Samaritans. He's walking among them. He's teaching among them. And one town rejects him, and his disciples are popping mad, and they say, Lord, should we call down fire from heaven? And Jesus says, no, because Jesus comes in peace. We see Jesus, in fact, sitting with the Samaritan woman by the well, talking to her, talking about her life, not rejecting her or judging her, but coming to her calmly, gently, humbly, coming in peace to her. This is his ministry up till now. We see Jesus arguing with the Pharisees about what life with God looks like, how it should be lived, arguing fiercely. But then at the same time, we see Jesus sitting down with the Pharisee teacher Nicodemus and talking tenderly with him at night. And still we also see in Luke 13 that it seems like the Pharisees are sometimes on his side. They tip him off. They say, watch out, Jesus, Herod wants to kill you. We find Jesus dealing with a woman who's about to be stoned for adultery, and he goes to her and kneels beside her, and he does not judge her, and he says, let whoever hasn't sinned throw the first stone. Then he says, go and sin no more, because Jesus comes to her in peace. Jesus meets Zacchaeus, this tax collector, this collaborator, this traitor to his own people, and Jesus goes to him and sits down at his table and breaks bread with him because Jesus comes in peace. It's what Paul later does when he enters the temple in Jerusalem, even though they wanted to kill him. He comes in peace. It's what Peter does when he travels to Rome in spite of the fact that it was the Romans who had killed his Lord on the cross. Peter goes to them in peace. And here we see Jesus coming in peace, riding into the city of Jerusalem. We see Jesus seeking the salvation of everyone, even those who oppose him and hate him and despise him. This is not the usual way that the world works. The world does not usually understand do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The world does not get turn the other cheek. It can't make heads or tails of love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. No, for most of the world, for most of history, the answer is do unto others so that they cannot do to you first, or turn the other bomb, or dehumanize your enemies and pray that God would destroy them. But not Jesus. His whole life is a demonstration of God's heart. It's this different slant on how we are to live in the world. It's this new way of being that is plotted out on God's will. Save everybody. bring everybody in, desire and hope for and seek the salvation of everyone. So Jesus rides on a donkey. He goes to the temple, but he does not destroy it. On the contrary, he seeks to save it. He seeks to save all the people whose lives have been distorted by the idolatry of wealth and power. He invades, but not to force them to do his will. He overturns, but not out of hate. Jesus comes in peace. This may or may not surprise us. If we've spent much time reading the Gospels, it shouldn't come as too much of a shock. I mean, we've seen it before. But part of the problem is that we often have such a limp vision of peace. We think peace means not making waves, not causing trouble. Just kind of keep quiet, keep your head down. And it's true that there's a way that peace does mean not being easily offended. It does mean not unleashing anger to ricochet in the lives of others and in our community. But the reality is that God's vision of peace is a deeper vision. It's about willing the good of others, even our enemies. It's seeking the larger, broader vision of God. And sometimes that's going to put us in places of conflict. Jesus goes to people. Jesus gets in there. Jesus rides into Jerusalem. And it's a model for us. Now think about this. How easy would it have been for Jesus just to say, I'm not going to kick the hornet's nest. I've got a pretty good ministry going on out here. What I'll do is just keep healing people, keep releasing people from the power of the devil, keep preaching to people everywhere except Jerusalem. Because I know if I go to Jerusalem, that's going to offend some people, that's going to cause some conflict, so I'll just stay away. Think about how easy that would have been for him. I mean, really, it was the temptation that the devil had laid out for him at the beginning, right? If you're the Son of God, all you got to do is bow down, worship me. I'll give you the whole world. You don't even have to suffer. It's the temptation that Jesus faced again in the Garden of Gethsemane when he said, Lord, if it's possible, let this cup be taken from you, but not my will be done. But not my will be done, but yours. If it's possible, let this cup pass from me. It's the temptation that he faced surely many times in his ministry, but here he is again. He gets on that donkey and he rides in. He goes into the heart of what he knows is going to be his last days. Jesus gets in there. I think there's something we can learn from this because I think a lot of times we are called to lean in to fulfill God's mission. Think about this in the Old Testament, Israel. His name was Jacob. He becomes Israel. He gets the name Israel because he dares to wrestle with God, doesn't play it safe. And I think we're called to be the kind of people who are willing to get in there with God, to follow where we sense that God is leading us, even when we aren't sure what's going to happen or how things will play out or if it's going to get confusing. We ride into Jerusalem. Sometimes this is going to put us in situations of conflict. And we don't seek conflict. It's not because we're belligerent. We seek the graces of humility. We seek the grace of not being easily offended. But we don't fear conflict either. Because listen, no positive change ever happens without some sort of friction. That's true in our own lives. I think it's true in the life of our church and our community. No positive change ever happens without some kind of friction. Life involves friction. And I think sometimes we can become so timid about who might get angry or what kind of conflict we might get into if we take a certain direction that we don't go anywhere or do anything. We get forever stuck outside of Jerusalem, in Jericho or somewhere, and we never work up the courage to get on that donkey and ride. But we do this the Jesus way. Notice that he didn't come into Jerusalem to harm and destroy it. He came in to save it. And I think that's how Jesus comes to us. Jesus seeks to enter our lives at a slant, to win us over to God. He comes humbly, riding on a donkey. He never forces. He won't break the bruised reed. He comes invitationally. Thanks be to God for that, because if Jesus were to invade our lives, were to give us what we deserved, most of us wouldn't last very long. At least I wouldn't. But that's not what he does. He's patient. He weeps over us. He waits for us. He walks softly. And there are times when Jesus is going to come into our lives. He's going to overturn the tables. But he doesn't just make a mess and take off. He's right there, always wanting to turn our lives back into a house of prayer that honors God. Jesus is the one who is gentle and humble in heart. He's the one in whom we will find rest for our souls. He's the one who gets down and washes the feet of his disciples, who repairs the ear of the slave and the guard, and the one who goes to the cross for us, for his enemies, and says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus comes in peace. And I've experienced Jesus riding quietly in peace into my life at many points. God has been so patient with me more times than I can count. I am grateful. But what I find more challenging, I like his peace and patience towards me, but what I find more challenging is extending that same patience to others. I forget that Jesus is riding humbly into the lives of others just as he has ridden into my life. I forget that God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love with others. I forget the words of 2 Peter 3:9. The Lord is patient with you, not wanting any to perish. All too often I want God to be patient with me, but to knock some other people upside the head. Yeah. We're all there together. That's good to know. Brothers and sisters, this is Holy Week. It's a special time of meditating on what Jesus has done for us on the cross. And I'm going to throw out 2 challenges to you. You ready for this? My first challenge, ask yourself, where is Jesus riding quietly, humbly into your life? Where is he showing you patience? Do you need to experience his patience as you grow in kindness, or not being so easily offended, or growing in humility, or growing in compassion? That's the first challenge. Where is Jesus showing up in your life? Think about this week. And my second challenge, where do you need to let Jesus ride quietly into someone else's life? Maybe being less judgmental about where other people are at, or less impatient with others, or maybe noticing your lack of empathy for others. Where do you need to let Jesus ride into other people's lives? Brothers and sisters, let us meditate on that during these 2 questions during this Holy Week. Jesus does not come to conquer and destroy. Jesus comes to fulfill, to bring life, to lead us into the kingdom of God. Jesus comes in peace. Amen.